Your Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's episode, Porter Martone's 2025 NHL Draft update, as well as what us Blackhawks fans should be watching for during the final 27 games of the season, before I wrap things up in segment 3 with my final thoughts from the Four Nations face-off and Team USA suffering yet another heartbreaking loss to Team Canada. Real quick though, first, be sure to go and hit the like button, comment down below as well, and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, all of which is 100% free, will not cost you anything, and is the best way to show support over here on Locked On Blackhawks. Happy Friday, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Finally, we're getting some warmer weather over here in the Chicagoland area, which certainly makes Fridays, especially knowing the weekend is on the horizon, a little bit easier. I hope everyone's weekend is off to a wonderful start. To kick things off on the show here today, it's time to get into my next 2025 NHL Draft update with none other than Porter Martone. Of course, I've already covered Michael Misa and James Hagens. Make sure to go and check out those shows if you haven't up to this point. Real quick before I get into Porter Martone, though, Blackhawks fans, one thing I do want to make sure to preface again on the show here today: these are not my final thoughts and my final NHL draft profiles on these players. I will be having more and final thoughts on these guys prior to the NHL draft, usually when the offseason begins right around April or early May. So when I see people in the comment section, and I know these episodes talking about high-end prospects like Hagens, Misa, and today's show with Martone, because the Blackhawks are fully engulfed in the Tankathon standings once again, I know that's what Blackhawks fans are really clinging themselves to this late into the season. I certainly understand that, but when I see people in the comments being like, I think you're overrating Misa's this, I think you're underrating Misa's that. Listen, I don't even have like my full thoughts. I don't even know fully in my own brain how I feel on these guys. I still have more data and more film to watch on all of them. The purpose of these segments is just to provide some updates on how their seasons have gone up to this point. So keep that in mind, that I'm not really like putting my foot towards a certain prospect or anything at this point in time. I'm just kind of bringing up noteworthy information that we should know about all of these players. But getting into Porter Martone, with that being said, real intriguing prospect for his size and skill combination. That combo, I really think, is something the Blackhawks have been missing for a long, long time. And listen, Blackhawks fans, even going back to the 2019 NHL draft, Kirby Dach, being his size and the skill that he had, was a really intriguing prospect to me, and I understood why the Blackhawks made that pick because of the size and skill combo. That was a team that, was still very undersized in their top 6, so I understood selecting Kirby Dach. Obviously, things didn't turn out very great selecting him 3rd overall, but I do think that kind of idea, that kind of skill set and build is really intriguing for the Blackhawks at this point in time. Martone is a 6'3", 207-pound winger who turned 18 years old back in October. So he's actually 1 week older than James Hagens and about 5 months older than Michael Misa. But Martone began his junior career back in 2022-23 with the Sarnia Sting, wound up getting traded though and ended the year with the then Mississauga Steelheads, wound up tallying 71 points, 33 goals, and 38 assists in 60 games as a 17-year-old, was also the captain of Canada's U18 World Juniors team and had a lights-out performance in that tournament. Second on the team in points, trailing only Gavin McKenna, as Martone had 5 goals and 12 assists for 17 points in 7 games. And so far this year for the now Brampton Steelheads, he has 84 points, 28 goals, and a whopping 56 assists through his opening 45 games, while also serving as the captain of the team. Unfortunately, we didn't really get a great look at Porter Martone during the World Juniors. Canada, didn't last very long in that tournament. He was also dealing with a little bit of a groin injury, so ultimately only tallied 1 goal and no assists in 3 games worth of action. But while it is disappointing that he didn't have the type of point performance, and neither did Canada, in terms of success as a team in that tournament, I don't really think it's something that's going to knock Martone's draft stock down all that far. Getting into the draft scouts and analysts that I like to look at and see where they have Martone ranked at this point in time. Elite Prospects has him at number 4. Bob McKenzie has him at number 4 as well. Craig Button has him ranked 3rd. McKean's Hockey has him 4th as well, like Bob McKenzie and Elite Prospects. Chris Peters, like Craig Button, has Porter Martone at number 3. Daily Faceoff has him at 4. Sportsnet has him at 3. And then Dobber Prospects, the highest of the bunch on Mr. Porter Martone, has him currently ranked at number 2. And as I mentioned, Porter Martone's size and skill combination is going to be very intriguing for not only just the Chicago Blackhawks, but I think all the teams that are going to be selecting early on in the 2025 NHL Draft. And while someone like Michael Misa, if you're looking at his comparison to James Hagens, Michael Misa being 6'1", 6'2", depending on where you're looking at, as I had someone in the comment section like critiquing me over James Hagens being listed at like 5'11 and a half, as opposed to me saying he was listed at 5'11. Ridiculous, kind of some of the gripes that people will go through in YouTube comment sections. But while Misa is the player that has better size than James Hagens for sure, Porter Martone is the biggest forward prospect that's expected to go in the top 5 of this year's draft. And while he doesn't have the foot speed of a Michael Misa, it's not like he's an absolute hindrance in terms of his wheels. He also has a really, really savvy puck handling game. I think his stick work is really sharp, and I love to see the uptick in playmaking this year. Obviously, he had 38 assists in 60 games last year for the Steelheads. You know, I kind of expected him to be more of a goal scorer for this Brampton Steelheads team this season. Still has 28 tucks in 45 games, nothing to bat an eye at, but the 56 assists that I've seen from Porter Martone has been really noteworthy this season. Really, really savvy hockey IQ. Some of the passes that he makes when you go and watch the film has been incredible. And I like him as a big right-handed shot, right? Like there just isn't a ton of those guys in the NHL. So his skill set, his size, very unique, very intriguing. A guy who also can throw his weight around a little bit and isn't afraid to mix it up in the dirty areas, can play with an edge. He's got a little bit of Brady Tkachuk in him a little bit at some point in times. Not as like overtly physical and not going to really fight guys all the time, but the power forward type of mold that Porter Martone has already at 18 years of age is certainly reminiscent to a lot of big-time players who have success in the most meaningful time of the year, aka the Stanley Cup playoffs. So yeah, I think, you know, all the teams in the top 5 are going to be giving Porter Martone a hard look. Ultimately, though, I think he winds up getting selected 3rd or 4th. Again, it's just really going to depend on what the draft rankings winds up being when it's all said and done. But Porter Martone, very interesting for the Blackhawks, as is Michael Misa, 2 guys who prior to the year, I thought, and I think a lot of people in the hockey world thought were going to go below James Hagens. I don't know if that's necessarily going to wind up being the case any longer. Going to be fun to keep up with all of these prospects throughout the remainder of the season. And by the way, once we, reach the NCAA tournament, once we get closer to the Frozen Four and are having conference tournaments in college hockey, once we start getting closer to the OHL playoffs and the CHL playoffs, I'll be sure to be providing updates on all of these high-end prospects for the 2025 NHL Draft right here on Locked On Blackhawks. Another reason to go and hit that subscribe button. Again, 100% free. Will not cost you anything and really does help me out tremendously. But there are my thoughts and a quick update on Porter Martone's current season with the Brampton Steelheads. Coming up in just a moment, I'll get into the Blackhawks' goals and what to be watching for during the final 27 games of the season. Real quick, though, I got to talk to you all about a new sponsor here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, which is Wonderful Pistachios. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Well, then go and crack into a great source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, with each 1 ounce serving having 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you than unsaturated fats to help keep you fueling feeling fuller longer. So whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. So go and get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch by visiting wonderfulpistachios.com in order to learn more. Again, that's wonderfulpistachios.com to check it out today. Segment 2, time to get into the Blackhawks' main goals and what to be watching for during the final 27 games of the season as they return to action tomorrow night against the Columbus Blue Jackets. I know it's not going to be the most exciting hockey to watch down the stretch, especially following the Four Nations face-off with all the intensity, the incredible atmospheres, the high leverage moments. We're not going to get any of that in the final 27 games for the Blackhawks, but there are still a ton of things for all of us to be watching for. Number one, of course, is Mr. Connor Bedard. He's been much better since the Blackhawks made the interesting coaching change to fire Luke Richardson and bring on Anders Sorensen. Bedard has been nearly a point-per-game guy under Sorensen's leadership with 30 points in 29 games. He's actually 24th in the NHL in points during that span as well, and is now up to 49 points, 16 goals, and 33 assists on the season. So what to be watching for? What kind of numbers does Connor Bedard wind up with? Do you think he can pot 14 goals in his final 27 games to reach 30 for the first time in his NHL career? Connor Bedard is going, as he's been for the last 2 years, going to be the main focal point for the Hawks in their final 27 games. I think the second most noteworthy thing to be watching this Blackhawks team for the rest of the year, though, is what's going to be happening at the trade deadline. Obviously, we've gotten some crazy updates on Seth Jones in the last 48 hours. Hasn't officially requested a trade from the Blackhawks, but obviously has made it clear that he would like to continue on somewhere else. I think for the Blackhawks, that's something they would be intrigued about as well. Now, getting it done, it's easier said than done. Go and check out yesterday's episode for a little bit more thoughts on that. And I will be having a deeper Jones trade outlook dropping next week in terms of what the Blackhawks potentially have to retain, what they would have to give up potentially along with Seth Jones, why maybe waiting into the offseason will work better for them. Be on the lookout for that episode dropping next week. But yeah, whether Seth Jones gets dealt before the March 7th deadline is definitely something to keep an eye on, as well as Ryan Donato, who was the Blackhawks' most attractive trade chip, but now that Jones might officially be on the market, that might bump Donato down a slot, but I still know there are going to be a ton of teams interested in Ryan Donato. Then there's still Pat Maroon, Craig Smith, Alec Martinez, Connor Murphy's had his name thrown out there in rumors. We've seen some stuff maybe about Lucas Reichel, considering that he isn't a Kyle Davidson prospect, so feels like the Blackhawks could be very involved in this year's trade deadline as a seller once again. Do want to point out, though, according to Scott Powers of The Athletic in a recent article that he dropped, doesn't sound like Alec Martinez or Pat Maroon are going to be on the move. The expectation is for both of them to remain with Chicago for the end of the year, and I just quite honestly don't understand that whatsoever. I've talked on the show about how Martinez said he was kind of committed to the Blackhawks for the rest of the year. At his age, and given how much winning he's done, maybe he doesn't strive for it as much as he used to. I don't know. You would think he still would have that passion, that desire to win with his clock is ticking. So I don't really understand Martinez not wanting to be on the move, and I certainly don't understand it with Pat Maroon, a guy who would be so sought after because of his veteran leadership and his experience in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And it's not even like you have to play him on a regular basis. He's just a good vibes guy to have around and a guy who's been there and done that. So really surprised to hear neither Martinez nor Maroon are expected to be on the move. Could potentially make Craig Smith a little bit more attractive to other teams, considering there may not be a ton of sellers at this year's deadline. Another thing to be watching for, Blackhawks fans, how does my boy Frank the Tank Nazar look down the stretch? Does he kind of etch himself back into that top six after he's been separated from Bedard as of late? Does he wind up sticking at the center ice position? Does he play more at the wing? Lots of reasons to be watching Frank Nazar down the stretch. And speaking of youngsters that are up with the NHL club right now, Does Landon Slaggert continue to look like a stud? He's got 2 goals, in his first 6 NHL games this year. Looked really sharp after signing his ELC with Notre Dame last year. I'm expecting Slaggert to continue to get opportunities moving forward. Will he keep making the most of this opportunity? And speaking of making the most of the opportunity, which young defenseman is going to really shine and wow us Blackhawks fans in these final 27 games? Is it going to be Nolan Allen? Is it going to be Ethan Del Mastro? Is it going to be Louis Crevier as he returns from concussion protocol, hopefully in these next couple of days? Going to be a young blue line, especially if someone like Seth Jones winds up getting dealt before March 7th. Also, which college prospects for the Blackhawks wind up signing their entry-level contract and playing NHL games before the season comes to a close? I think the 2 most likely are Ryan Green and Sam Renzel. One of my bold predictions that I said prior to the start of the season, Ryan Green signs his entry-level contract and scores his first NHL goal. I think he and Renzel are the 2 to keep an eye on the most. Maybe Oliver Moore winds up signing his entry-level deal, but I honestly wouldn't hate Oliver Moore going back to Minnesota for 1 more year as well. And then there's still guys like Aiden Thompson, Dominic James, maybe even Tage Harding from Providence. The latter 3 prospects that I just named aren't necessarily as likely to sign their ELC and burn a year at the end of this season. I think they're more likely to start up and get a real offseason and join on with the Rockford Ice Hogs in the fall. But those are 3 other prospects currently playing college hockey to be keeping an eye on. And another thing to keep an eye on, the Tankathon standings. As I broke down a few days ago, the Blackhawks currently have the 2nd best odds of landing the number 1 overall pick, but they're only 4 points ahead of the San Jose Sharks. And as I outlined in my Tankathon standings update, I don't really know if the San Jose Sharks are going to be doing all that much selling. Maybe I'm wrong at this year's trade deadline. Whereas the Blackhawks, I mean, Donato could be coming off the roster. Seth Jones could be coming off the roster, maybe even more. So certainly reasons to think the Blackhawks could be getting worse and losing a lot of games in their final 27. And my last tidbit in terms of what to be watching for, Anders Sorensen. It feels like we're going to be getting some type of update on what the Blackhawks are at least going to be doing with him by the end of the year. You want to be fully immersed in this process and give yourself as much time as possible, right? And I feel like the Blackhawks at this point have a really good inkling about Anders Sorensen, as I think all of us do. He's a really good coach, and he's been great for the young guys in stretches and did a lot of great things for the Rockford Ice Hogs. I just don't think he's an NHL coach at this point in time. And it's going to be really curious to see how that impacts his future. Should that wind up being the decision? Should the Blackhawks go a different direction with their full-time hire? Does Sorensen remain with the Rockford Ice Hogs? Does he get an offer from another organization? Is he pissed that he doesn't wind up getting the full-time job? Like a lot to be watching for in terms of Anders Sorensen's future as well, and maybe any tidbits that Kyle Davidson gives us in terms of the decision-making along the way. Some goals for the Blackhawks in their final 27. The first goal, it's for Anders Sorensen. Just give the kids the chances. It has to be a full-blown youth movement. That's the only reason people are going to be watching, and that's really the name of the game for the team. Should have been all year long, in my opinion. Continue to give Lukas Reichel third-line opportunities. So stupid that he played on the 4th line for as long as he did. And maybe that made him a little tougher and a little more rugged and harder to play against. I still think it was a waste of time, and I like him up in the lineup on the 3rd line, and give him power play looks as well. We don't have guys who can skate like him really outside of Nazar and Ilya Mikheyev. Lukas Reichel can enter the offensive zone with the puck and get things set up. So I'd like to see him get some more power play 2 opportunities. Speaking of the kids, though, Frank Nazar, all 3 zones, all 3 departments, power play, penalty kill, 5-on-5. Let the kid go out there and roam, and if he has to learn the hard way, let him learn the hard way. I mean, the worst thing that happens is we lose more games and we get a better crack at landing the number 1 overall pick. So no harm, no foul. Let these kids learn on the fly. Another thing in terms of gives the kids chances, got to see Ethan Del Mastro, Nolan Allen, and Louis Crevier in the lineup over TJ Brody. Looks like Brody's going to be playing tomorrow night against Columbus. Don't understand it whatsoever. It's been an absolute nightmare. Other goal, it's for Anders Sorensen. Finish the year on a high note, baby. Go into the offseason with some confidence. He's really been the number 1 for the Blackhawks for the last 2 months now. And if he finishes the year like he's been playing all season long up to this point in time, I really think the Blackhawks are going to have to trade either Peter Mrazek or Laurent Brossoit, who I legitimately forget is still even a member of this team sometime. A goal for Alex Vlasic. Find that groove once again. It feels like it's been a little bit of a bumpy road for Vlasic over the last month and a half. Hopefully this break kind of allows him to reset, get fresh, and I really would like to see him thriving like he was early on in the year and throughout most of last season. I don't know how that happened, but I'm randomly bleeding a ton on my pinky. Next goal for Tyler Bertuzzi. He's got 17 goals currently on the season. He has to finish with at least 25, has to score 8 goals in these final 27 games of the year. For Frank Nazar, the goal that I have for my boy Frank the Tank is for him to hit double-digit goals. He's got 4 so far on the season. Get 6 more in these final 27 games, Frank. I would love to see that out of you. And then last but certainly not least, can't forget about number 98, Connor Bedard. Hit 75 points, Bedsy. He's currently at 49. Again, 27 games left in the year. That means he has to accumulate 26 points during those final 27 games. And let me tell you what, Blackhawks fans, for Connor Bedard, if he accomplishes that, if he does reach 75 points, with the lack of help he's had, with how bad this team has been once again, that is a super notable feat. For him to almost be at a point per game and close in on 80 points, that would be an incredible feat, and I'd be very, very stoked about the season that Connor Bedard had. For the most part, again, as a 19-year-old, one of the youngest players still in the NHL. But there is everything to be watching for us Blackhawks fans in the final 27 games of the season. Coming up in just a moment, I'm going to clean off my pinky real quick and share my thoughts on a heartbreaking loss for Team USA against Team Canada. Blackhawks fans, give me just 1 second as I'm cleaning off my bloody pinky. I don't even know how that happened. Apologies for the delay, but back here on Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick, just want to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen. Here to start off your weekend. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter with the local coverage you love from Locked On. You can easily find the link for Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, have to share my thoughts on an absolute heartbreaking loss for the United States last night to Team Canada in the championship of the Four Nations face-off. Just an absolutely incredible tournament, but man, a painful loss as a United States citizen that I'm sure many of my viewers and listeners can relate to at this point. Staying up late, going through the emotional roller coaster that was the opening 60 minutes, going to sudden death 5-on-5 like it was in 2010 at the Winter Olympics. And the best player in the world winds up banging the United States once again. It was Sidney Crosby at the Winter Olympics in 2010. Connor McDavid is the one with the game winner here in the 2025 Four Nations face-off. My first thoughts, really, Blackhawks fans, was just, we let Canada off the hook. We let Canada off the hook because the first period I thought was really sharp from the United States, even though Canada jumped ahead 1-0 once again, like they did in the first matchup. Nathan McKinnon with an incredible shot, as he does, to put Canada ahead 1-0. But I thought it was a really, really nice response from the United States. They've been very comfortable after giving up the opening goal throughout the course of this tournament. Brady Tkachuk winds up tying it up. Huge scream in the celebration was, it was everything. And then Jake Sanderson to put the United States ahead 2-1 after. A lot of people were hoping he was going to take a dive to get Quinn Hughes in this tournament. Looked like maybe he had a chance to net the game winner for the United States. Sam Bennett comes up and ties it up in the second. Really sound second period. Really, really good second period from Canada. Their best undoubtedly in this game. But the reason why I feel like the United States let them off the hook is because they were the better team in the third period and they were the better team in overtime as well. But it's the game of hockey sometimes. I do got to tip my cap to Jordan Binnington, who I absolutely despise. I really, really think he does not have the emotions to be a consistent goaltender year in and year out, but make no mistake about it. When Jordan Binnington is at his best, he's one of the best goaltenders in the world. And some of those saves that he made late in the third period and especially in overtime were incredible. The glove diving save that he had on Brady Tkachuk, the couple of saves that he had on Austin Matthews. I don't know how Matthews didn't pot that game winner, and not the tournament we needed out of Pappy as the captain. I was pretty disappointed. Not only that he didn't bury that one, but just honestly, he did have 2 assists in this game, but we need him in excuse me, I'm getting myself so worked up here. We need him in the goal scoring departments, and he just didn't come through in that way in the tournament for the United States. Binnington robs him with the blocker in overtime. Hat tip to Jordan Binnington. He, in that building, man, something about it just brings out the absolute best of him. But yeah, it felt like the United States let Canada off of the hook because they outplay them in the third and in overtime. But when you leave, and Austin Matthews is the one who leaves Connor McDavid all alone in the slot. I mean, literally 1 second before Mitch Marner makes that pass, my heart sank because you just left the best player in the world wide open, all alone, in the most dangerous spot on the ice. And of course, he's going to go top tatas to win the bad boy. That's what Connor McDavid does. You play with fire, you're going to get burned. What I do got to bring up next, though, Blackhawks fans, 9.3 million viewers tuning into this game on ESPN last night, the most viewed hockey game on ESPN ever. And while I am upset that the United States wasn't able to beat Canada to win the Four Nations face-off, and there are people out there still saying the United States is Canada's little brother in hockey, I'll let those people continue on with that statement because I'll tell you what, at next year's Olympics, I really like the United States' chances of using this as just a little bit of bulletin board motivation and knowing they're capable of beating this bunch. I really like their chances at next year's Olympics. And they were right there in this game. I mean, the difference between the United States and Canada in terms of hockey skill sets has never been closer. And it does feel like the passing of the guard could be coming soon. It just didn't happen to be last night at TD Garden. But for 9.3 million people to be watching this game, incredible for the sport of hockey and its future. You have to be encouraged. So many people texting me, people that I know never watch hockey. It was incredible to see hockey shine on the spotlight. Huge thanks to all the players who bought into this tournament and got to showcase why hockey is such an incredible sport. And I think it's going to have exponential growth over these next couple of years, especially with the Stanley Cup playoffs right on the horizon. I think there's going to be a lot of carryover audience tuning into the Stanley Cup playoffs, and they're going to be like, we've been missing out on this for years. An incredible job by the NHL and especially the players, because they were the ones, as PK Subban put it so elegantly, like, yeah, the NHL put this tournament together, but the players were the ones who made it as special as it really was, and buying into the amount that they did, which they didn't absolutely have to do. And remember, there was some concern about that, but these are hockey guys we're talking about. Remember, they don't know what it's like to not give an 100% effort. That's why it makes the All-Star game so kind of wonky. So even though the Canadians came away with the win once again, still an amazing couple of weeks for the sport of hockey, and super excited about the growth of the sport moving forward. Huge thank you to the players. Huge thank you to each of the four nations involved in this tournament. Huge thank you to the Tkachuks, because they put this bad boy on an absolute spotlight. They're going to be super, super marketable moving forward, and I think that's going to be the case for this game moving forward as well, especially with the salary cap continuing to grow these next few years. A lot of good things coming for the game of hockey as a result of this Four Nations face-off. Canada winds up taking the championship. Connor McDavid with the game-winning goal. Nathan MacKinnon gets named tournament MVP. Do want to make sure to bring up, though, real quick, as a Blackhawks fan who gets jabs thrown their way all the time for Connor Bedard's plus-minus and whatnot from salty Minnesota Wild fans that adore Brock Faber, Brady Shea, I mean, he has tons of experience over Brock Faber. I thought Brady Shea, Brady Shea was the best defenseman in this tournament. Brock Faber is just not at that level. Every time he touched the puck in the defensive zone, I was scared. I was worried. He was not making hard passes. He was not making big boy plays. And it was really notable to me. Again, he's a very young player who's going to continue to learn. But I didn't think it was a very good tournament from Brock Faber, in my opinion. I thought it was a horrible tournament from Jack Hughes. I mean, he got absolutely bullied out there like a little boy. The struggle of him playing in the most meaningful time of the year against bigger and more physical competition. Yeah, definitely it wasn't a very great look for Jack Hughes. Hoping Matthew Tkachuk is A-okay. I know he wasn't out there for the United States and most of the second half of that game due to injury. Keeping my fingers crossed for him. I'm sure the Florida Panthers are upset about the situation, but listen, at the end of the day, it was for the greater good of the game, and it had to happen. Super, super fun tournament that I think is going to have everyone stoked for more best on best coming in the game of hockey over these next couple of years. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. Everyone, as always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Until next time, everyone, enjoy the rest of your weekends. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.